minkä ikäinen oletkin, kuka tahansa oletkin. EU auttaa sinua uskaltautumaan uusille urille ja etenemään elämässäsi. Tukea hankkeille, jotka ovat sydäntäsi lähellä. Rahoitusta ja verkostoja, joilla voidaan lujittaa kasvua ja luoda enemmän työpaikkoja. Laadukkaampaa liikennettä ja infrastruktuuria sujuvoittamaan arkea. Vihreämpiä vaihtoehtoja, jotka säästävät ympäristöä ja tuovat ulottuvillesi puhtaampaa energiaa. Kohdennettua koulutusta, jolla voidaan kehittää taitoja ja työllistettävyyttä ja varmistetaan, että kaikilla on mahdollisuus päästä eteenpäin. Tutkimusta ja innovaatiota, jotka tuovat sinulle uutta tekniikkaa ja parempaa terveydenhoitoa. Euroopan unioni investoi tulevaisuuteesi. Suomen tulevaisuuteen ja koko EU:n tulevaisuuteen. Parhaat tarinat syntyvät tarttumalla mahdollisuuksiin. Maailma on täynnä mahdollisuuksia, ihan kaikille. Euroopan unioni tarjoaa tilaisuuksia ja konkreettisia tapoja saavuttaa enemmän, mitä tahansa teetkin, minkä ikäinen oletkin, kuka tahansa oletkin. EU auttaa sinua uskaltautumaan uusille urille ja etenemään elämässäsi. Tukea hankkeille, jotka ovat sydäntäsi lähellä. Rahoitusta ja verkostoja, joilla voidaan lujittaa kasvua ja luoda enemmän työpaikkoja. Laadukkaampaa liikennettä ja infrastruktuuria sujuvoittamaan arkea. Vihreämpiä vaihtoehtoja, jotka säästävät ympäristöä ja tuovat ulottuvillesi puhtaampaa energiaa. Kohdennettua koulutusta, jolla voidaan kehittää taitoja ja työllistettävyyttä ja kaikilla on mahdollisuus päästä eteenpäin. Tutkimusta ja innovaatiota, jotka tuovat sinulle uutta tekniikkaa ja parempaa terveydenhoitoa. Euroopan unioni investoi tulevaisuuteesi. Suomen tulevaisuuteen ja koko EU:n tulevaisuuteen. Parhaat tarinat syntyvät tarttumalla mahdollisuuksiin. Sinun tarinaasi kirjoitetaan parhaillaan. Maailma on täynnä mahdollisuuksia, ihan kaikille. Euroopan unioni tarjoaa tilaisuuksia ja konkreettisia tapoja saavuttaa enemmän, mitä tahansa teetkin, minkä ikäinen oletkin, kuka tahansa oletkin. EU auttaa sinua uskaltautumaan uusille urille ja etenemään elämässäsi. Tukea hankkeille, jotka ovat sydäntäsi lähellä. Rahoitusta ja verkostoja, joilla voidaan lujittaa kasvua ja luoda enemmän työpaikkoja. Laadukkaampaa liikennettä ja infrastruktuuria sujuvoittamaan arkea. Vihreämpiä vaihtoehtoja, jotka säästävät ympäristöä ja tuovat ulottuvillesi puhtaampaa energiaa. Kohdennettua koulutusta, jolla voidaan kehittää taitoja ja työllistettävyyttä ja varmistetaan, että kaikilla on mahdollisuus päästä eteenpäin. Tutkimusta ja innovaatiota, jotka tuovat sinulle uutta tekniikkaa ja parempaa terveydenhoitoa. Euroopan unioni investoi tulevaisuuteesi. Suomen tulevaisuuteen ja koko EU:n tulevaisuuteen. Parhaat tarinat syntyvät tarttumalla mahdollisuuksiin. Sinun tarinaasi kirjoitetaan parhaillaan. Maailma on täynnä mahdollisuuksia, ihan kaikille. Euroopan unioni tarjoaa tilaisuuksia ja konkreettisia tapoja saavuttaa enemmän, mitä tahansa teetkin, minkä ikäinen oletkin, kuka tahansa oletkin. EU auttaa sinua uskaltautumaan uusille urille ja etenemään elämässäsi. Tukea hankkeille, jotka ovat sydäntäsi lähellä. Rahoitusta ja verkostoja, joilla voidaan lujittaa kasvua ja luoda enemmän työpaikkoja. Laadukkaampaa liikennettä ja infrastruktuuria sujuvoittamaan arkea. Vihreämpiä vaihtoehtoja, jotka säästävät ympäristöä ja tuovat ulottuvillesi puhtaampaa energiaa. Kohdennettua koulutusta, jolla voidaan kehittää taitoja ja työllistettävyyttä ja varmistetaan, että kaikilla on mahdollisuus päästä eteenpäin. Tutkimusta ja innovaatiota, jotka tuovat sinulle uutta tekniikkaa ja parempaa terveydenhoitoa. Euroopan unioni investoi tulevaisuuteesi. Suomen tulevaisuuteen ja koko EU:n tulevaisuuteen. Parhaat tarinat syntyvät tarttumalla mahdollisuuksiin. Sinun tarinaasi kirjoitetaan parhaillaan.
No niin, moi ja tervetuloa Euroopan tulevaisuuteen katsovaan yleiskeskusteluun.
And welcome to this citizens dialogue about the objectives and the results of the Investment for Europe program. This is this year's final event at the same time. My name is Joona Orpana and I will be one of the moderators today, together with my colleague Emmi Kosomaa. We are both students at the Aalto University, and we represent the Students' Union here, and we are very happy that this dialogue takes place here at the Aalto University School of Business. Let's start our dialogue today with 3 short introductions into this topic, and after that we have about 60 minutes for questions and comments. Our speakers today are Mr. Jyrki Katainen, Vice President of the European Commission, who will be speaking to us about the investment plan for Europe and its aims and results. And after him, we will be hearing from the Chairman of the Board of Epiqus Oy, and he will be talking about social impact bond model. And that's quite new to me, for example. And our final speaker is Professor Erkki Ormala from the Aalto University School of Management, and he will be talking to us about EU funding in achieving innovative results. We have audience present here in this room, and then we have some spectators who are attending via our web stream. We will be speaking in Finnish today, but we have interpretation into English, which you can hear online as well. So you can ask questions in both languages, and our Twitter hashtags are EU Dialogues and Future of Europe. So participate there as well. Our first speaker is the Vice President of Aalto University, Mr. Eero Eloranta, who has been cooperating with us in the board of the Students' Union this year as well. The floor is yours. Thank you, Joona and Emmi. Mr. Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, first of all, I have to apologize that slush came a week too early this year, and I think some members of our audience have stayed home due to that reason. But this is a great pleasure for me and an honor for me to open this citizens' dialogue. And I would like to welcome you to this event, and I would also like to highlight the fact that the theme of this dialogue is exactly right. And we are in the right place, speaking to the right people, and at the right time too. Why am I saying this? Why is this the exact right topic? I would like to go back to the time before Aalto University was founded. In 2008, things started to happen first in the United States, and then in Europe, and then elsewhere in the world, and also in Finland. And these turbulent times have continued since then. First, we tried to think about whether this was a V or a W or other things. And one of the economies who has not really recovered from the recession is Finland. We have notable economists here today, so you have to be very careful about what you say. I'm a professor, and I've been looking at the company's order books for 20 years now, and my estimate is that in Finland we are lacking exports income approximately 20 or 30 billion euros annually, and that's a very serious matter. So that is the right issue, and why is this the right place? Well, Aalto University was where the idea for that came up in 2006, before these turbulent times began, and that was a very significant thing. At the same time, university people, the economy, and politicians started to talk about the same thing, namely that we need new kinds of competent people with new competences, new skills, people who bring together technology, science, the business aspects, and other things as well. In 2009, we really saw that these are the kinds of people we need. These are the kinds of people that Aalto University and other universities as well can produce. So let's dismantle our silos and try to develop competences for people, as versatile competences as possible. And how do you do that? Well, you do that together. Why is this are these the right people here? How many students do we have here? This is your job. This is for you to solve this deficit in our exports, and you have to demand from us that we help you in your work. So, a warm welcome to Aalto University.
Kiitos Eero.
Thank you, Eero. That was a good start for this discussion, and our next speaker is Jyrki Katainen, Vice President of the European Commission. He will be talking to us about the investment plan for Europe. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here to talk about the investment plan for Europe and the future of Europe in a wider sense as well. It's actually the first time that I'm here in this school. For some reason I haven't been here before. I've been to a lot of universities, but not here. And I'm happy to be here to talk about the future of our economy and investments. I will talk about the investment plan in a few minutes, but first I will give you some context. Why is it important that we hold such events as this? I have a mission, and it is that I want to help Finns and other member states, citizens, companies in the European Union to really take on ownership of Europe. The owners of Europe are not in Brussels. Well, maybe they are there when they come together for their council meetings there, but I work for the European Commission, and we prepare issues for decision makers. Some initiatives come from member states, some come from companies, some from universities, and some from the Commission's own thinking. But the owners of Europe are the shareholders of the European Union, i.e. the member states and their citizens. For a lot of years, our owners were very silent. They didn't seem to want to have an impact or play a role in the future of Europe. So it was lazy money, so to speak. You have inherited something, but you aren't willing to do anything, and you aren't expecting a return for your input. We had the financial crisis, and I think it really colored this ownership in a very negative light. The audience really had a very negative attitude towards its own ownership, and some branches of the industry felt the same. And that meant that the owner didn't want to be in the public light developing their assets and its value. But the situation has changed. External challenges like the presidential election in the United States and the changes that has brought into international politics. Russia, the eastern neighbor of Finland, has shown its ability to take on parts of its neighboring countries, cyber attacks towards the most powerful countries in the world, problems with legality in Poland and Hungary, and fake news, I might add. I think all of this seems to make our owners now more aware. They feel that while we now own a piece of this integrated Europe, maybe we should try to get something out of that piece that we own and develop Europe at the same time. The discussion in the Finnish Parliament yesterday was a good example of this. Once again, I would like to thank Aalto University so that we were able to come here, and the Students' Union as well, for hosting this event. Let's try to come up with new ideas here. The investment plan next. The financial crisis really made a huge gap in investments in all of Europe. The previous speaker said that there's a 2 or 3 billion euro exports deficit in Finland, and that's a huge amount of money. And if we were able to get that money, I think our economy and our society would be very different. And this investment gap in Europe annually has been around 300 to 400 billion euros. So we are lacking investments in Europe worth of 400 billion euros annually. Everybody knows that that really makes us weaker in the world market. It makes us less able to modernize our economies and societies, and through that, in the short term and the long term, it will weaken our competitiveness and our opportunity to bring in profits to develop our welfare states. That was the basic idea when this plan was set up. Mr. Juncker, the chairman of the European Commission, said that we cannot do everything in the economy. So let's see what the EU could do to bring us out of this recession of investments and tackle this problem. The lack of investments has really weakened Europe's ability to modernize itself. But on the other hand, financial crisis has really forced some of the countries who before had not carried out their own internal reforms to improve their competitiveness. It has really forced them to do that now. Ministers of finance always say that you shouldn't waste a good crisis. And this happened in a lot of countries, in some of our member states. Some have reformed their structures more than others, and that has really had a positive impact on those countries' competitiveness, both in the short term and in the long term. Global economy has changed, the markets have changed, technology has changed. We have new incomers to the world market. Just one example would be China. Rasmussen Global, that was an article I just read coming in, and it says that since 2010, China's investments into Europe have increased by 1,500 percentage points. But that's not the cap, not by a long shot. So I'm just welcoming China into Europe, at least when we know where their investments are going. We have to focus on improving competitiveness so that we can modernize European economy. The mega trends that we have to be able to face in Europe are circular economy. That's one of the tasks that I have on my desk. I have to improve circular economy business models in Europe. The second is digitalization, AI, machine learning, robotization. I think these are more or less the same, but anyway, they are all slightly different in a sense too. They have their own special characteristics. At the beginning of the mandate of this commission, we set up the so-called European Investment Program that has 3 different areas. And the point of these 3 areas is to strengthen competitiveness in the long term, to carry out measures nationally and at the European level. And I think the most well-known part of this investment program is the ESIF fund, the European Strategic Investment Fund. It works in a very simple way. We used existing EU budget in a new manner. We allocated a few billion euros, 16 billion euros of EU budget funds to a guarantee fund. And the European Investment Bank put in 5 billion euros, and then this guarantee fund had 21 billion euros as a guarantee. And the idea is to cover the risks of the European Investment Bank when it is participating and funding higher risk investments. The 21 billion euros as a guarantee means that the European Investment Bank can fund projects with actually 63 billion euros. The European Investment Bank is an existing institution that funds projects annually with approximately 70 or 80 billion euros, but its nature is to be very cautious in its investments. So the EIB is quite conservative in its investments. they need to maintain their AAA credit rating. But now the EFSI Guarantee Fund means that the EIB can take on more risk. And this was the point of the entire idea here. With the 63 billion euros, within 3 years, we can fund higher risk projects, new innovations, for example, R&D projects at SMEs and so on, in a way that we can actually trigger projects worth of 315 billion euros. So EIB funds the projects. It is there to share the risk of a private investor, and this means that we can get in liquidity from the market for rational projects. We have liquidity in Europe. We have so much of it, but due to banking regulation, for example, the banks cannot take on as much risk as they would be ready to do, and our capital markets in Europe are not as well developed as in the US, for example. To this day, we have channeled funding worth of approximately 50 billion euros out of that 63, and it will trigger investments worth of 250 billion euros. And by next summer, and remember that our objective was to trigger investments worth of 315 billion euros. So that this EFSI funding will actually cover 100 billion out of that 300 or 400 billion investment gap that exists in Europe. So we cannot bridge the gap entirely, because we need to be very careful that we aren't competing with private money. Out of 30% out of this goes to SMEs, 21% goes to R&D, 21% goes to the energy sector, to renewables, for example, 11% to digital infrastructure, and 9% to transport. Finland has done relatively well in EFSI funding. When we calculate the amount of EFSI funding per GDP among member states, Finland is placed 6th. So ahead of Finland, there are some southern European countries and Eastern European countries. So out of the second group of countries, we are the best. And I'm very happy about that. We have 25 infra projects, 4 SME and capital funding projects in this country. The amount of EFSI funding is 1.4 billion euros, and that will trigger projects worth of 5.6 billion euros. This is the situation now at this moment. The EIB is open for business every day, except on the weekend, and you can go to them, and if you're planning investments, you could go to them and ask if they are interested in becoming a partner. So you should know that. People tend to think that European Union money is very bureaucratic. You have to go to the regional level and then the national level and so on. But when we talk about ESIF, then the only address that you need to know is here in Helsinki. Is it Fabianinkatu, where the EIB office in Finland is located. And they will help entrepreneurs and companies and public sector operators face to face. One more idea, since we are in a place where new business ideas are created. One thing that I have thought about that Finland could do better is capital funding. So ESIF invests in venture capital funds as well, and I think for a country like Finland that could be very useful, a very useful opportunity. So start up and scale up funding and the increasing of that. Everybody knows that in Finland capital has been pretty scarce in Finland. Now we are getting some from abroad, but I think this is something that we could do better. The other part of this investment package is the so-called assisting instruments. Many countries don't have good capacity for carrying out large-scale infrastructure projects. And that is why we have set up this hub where the public sector can contact to get technical assistance for their infra projects. Another thing related to the second pillar is the Invest EU portal. Go on and Google that. EU Invest portal. The idea behind that is very simple. So if you are somebody who is looking to invest but haven't found the funds as yet, you can send your projects into the Commission. We will put it into the portal and you will get global visibility for your projects. So investors from Finland or from Singapore can find your projects, which they would not be able to do otherwise. So you can get funding through that. This works pretty well. We have a little more than 200 projects in the portal, and the interest of investors has been pretty good. A few months back, I don't know what the situation is now, but a few months back, the most important projects in terms of interest were in Greece. That's interesting. The people contacting the portal are bodies, institutions wishing to invest. So this is an opportunity for investment for project promoters. The final part of the investment plan or program is focused on structural reform. We have strengthened the pressure towards member states, the Commission has, to carry out structural reform in the member states. We cannot force anybody, but we can still put on pressure to do this. This reform has taken place, but this work is never done. The second set is European structural reform, and there we have two large entities. The biggest is the internal market. When the markets are changing and the technology is changing, the internal market needs to be reformed. In Europe, we have not had a digital single market up until now. We have 28 different copyright laws. We have 28 different this and that. So it has been very difficult to buy and sell across borders. Taking digital content into another country and using it there has been very difficult. So piece by piece, we are now reforming this. The second thing is energy policy. That has been highly national. It has been a regulative confusion, and there we are coming up with better markets. I don't know what is the most important, but the third issue here is the capital market. We need good developed European capital markets. As I said earlier, European capital markets are underdeveloped. And now by changing regulation, we try to encourage the capital markets to develop better in Europe. That has gone pretty well. The reception has been very good, although it will bear fruit only in the long term. And the final part of the European structural reform is trade policy. Trade policy has not been of interest to anybody for years, but now it is, because people are opposing free trade, and I think due to changes in world policy, the wave has turned to the other side. So people are actually for free trade. The EU is negotiating with a lot of countries for free trade agreements, and we are trying to complete these agreements, and we try to open up new markets every 6 years. We are now in talks with Mercosur countries, so Uruguay, Paraguay, and so on, Brazil, Argentina. And if we are able to complete those talks and come up with an agreement, our duties will be lowered by 4 billion euros annually, and that's an even better deal than what we came up with Japan. We're talking about tariffs and standards, but more than that, we're talking about values, food safety, occupational safety, things like that. We can bring these values into international trade. And that's also a way to reinforce multilateralism. So if we want to combat unilateralism and the right of the strongest to dictate, then of course we have to do well in all of this. Trade policy is also a part of my job description, and I think it is a significant tool that we can use to modernize the European economy. Dear friends, I would like to stop here. Let's start our dialogue after the next speaker. Thank you.
Kiitos, Jyrki.
Thank you, Jyrki.
Seuraavaksi oikeastaan olisikin vielä pohjustussanoja tulossa Jussi Nykäseltä Epikukselta. Jussi täällä paikalla.
Contribution from Jussi Nykänen from Epicus. Jussi is here. He needs a microphone. Here's one. Thank you. All right. Thank you. And a technical device also. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jussi Nykänen. I represent a company called Epiqus. And it is my challenging task to tell you in about 10 minutes about what is social impact investments and what are results-based procurement and social impact bond. But let's try how we manage. First of all, social impact investment, or social impact bond, that is a new kind of instrument which was developed because several fund management companies had two different kinds of activities. One of them was more like a charity. They were funding socially constructive projects that were not supposed to bring any profit. And there were projects that were supposed to generate returns. And usually on both sides of this China wall, the investment targets or investment objects were similar. And that's when the social impact investment was developed. It's based on looking at the normal risk and return curves, but also the social impact curve. So when starting the investment, we consider what else this money is going to generate apart from a financial return. That is the basic starting point that we think about from the outset. And there is an area under social impact investment that in Finland is called social impact bond, which is relatively misleading because we're not talking about bonds, we're talking about funds. And what these SIB funds do is that private funds, private money is invested in action, in measures that is aiming to prevent a social problem from being created. There are many good sides to this. One of them is that we get private financing to serve social good. Second, the operator that is benefiting is only paying for results. If no results are achieved, the operator pays nothing and the investors bear the risk. If there are positive results, the social operator will pay part of the return to the investors. The third point is that we invest in prevention. We don't wait for the problem to be created. We invest as early as possible so that we can try and prevent the problem from emerging in the first place, which helps us get more return for our euros. And this means that we need to model the problem, we need to be able to model the impact that we're seeking, and we need to be able to measure the result because the payment is based on the measured results. And as we're talking about investments, we also need to define the return on investment to investors. In this sector, Finland is #1 in continental Europe. England is actually #1 in Europe, but Finland is #2 in the whole of Europe. we have 3 SIBs in Finland at the moment that are up and running. The first of them is the Well-being at Work SIB. That is a small pilot project, but Sitra, the Finnish Independence Fund, has been very active. The one, number 2, the one that we're talking about now, is the job training for immigrants and refugees, which was contracted by the government contracting agency Hansel a year and a half ago on behalf of the Ministry for Economic Affairs and the Economy. And this is, the fund size is slightly below 14 million euro, and this indicates how early stages we're still are in this market. So we're only establishing the ways of operating. The European Investment Fund and the EFSI fund of the European Commission, and they have invested most of this 13.5 million. There were a few significant influences or effects. This, first of all, makes it possible to scale up the operations. We are aiming to employ 2,000 immigrants within this project, within this program, and bring benefit to immigrants, refugees who have been granted permission to reside in Finland, or residence permit. And this has also been a wake-up call to big investors to see that SIBs are real investment targets. It's not only something to make you feel good in a small scale, but it's a real investment target. And thirdly, it has made what we do in Finland, it has made it visible, and several European countries are now following Finland's example and making similar kinds of funding instruments. We are carrying out the project, and the government measures how much tax revenue the government gets from this group in comparison with the control group, and how much they save in terms of unemployment benefits in comparison with the control group. And if there have been returns in terms of these metrics, then the government will pay return on investment. Apart from being an innovative funding model in which private funding is made to work for the good of society, this is also helping create a new ecosystem. This is a significant change for the environment in Finland. The ministry, through one single competitive tendering, has been able to recruit 10 operators to provide recruitment services and employment services. And we are getting immigrants to work. And they, the recruiters, of course, or the service providers, work together with employers. The employers announce that they cannot, they have a vacant position that they are not able to fill. And we try to find suitable people from among the immigrants. And of course, the immigrants will benefit because they are more easily integrated into the Finnish society, because several studies have shown that work and jobs are the best way to become integrated, because they can support themselves and their families. This is an important benefit for the immigrants. These are the targets that we aim at achieving. First of all, we try to help the immigrants find a job as quickly as possible, so that they have to spend as short a time in integration training as possible. When they get quickly to a job, They learn what is needed in that particular job, and of course they continue learning the language also in the working community. So school-based training is reduced. The employment rate, we are trying to double, more than double from what it has been among immigrants, because from day one, employers will be involved. So the training path for immigrants is tailor-made based on the needs of the job. And the immigrant can be certain that they can find a job after the training. And in the end, the Finnish government will benefit in terms of savings of 71% in the direct costs to society. In January, we had the first funding round, and 100 people are already working, so we are on a good track, and we'll see later on how well we do. Thank you.
Kiitos Jussi.
Thank you, Jussi.
Sitten kuullaan vielä
And then
innovaatioekosysteemistä
we will
EU-rahoituksesta.
hear about innovation ecosystems and EU funding. Professor Erkki Korpala, the floor is yours. Thank you. I was very happy because I have been dealing with EU matters quite a lot in recent years. When I was the president of the European Electronics and Cultural Association, these were good news to me. So finally, it seems that we are getting to implement the digitalized single market and get to solve the long-term disputes about the trade areas. The important problem in Europe is the lack of risk or venture funding. It is only the rate of venture funding is only 8% of that in the United States, and the banks alone are no longer able to take care of it, as the need is so high. But it is my task today to tell you about what the university is doing, what research and innovation actually have for a role to play in economic growth and in the future for the citizens of Europe. And I will start by telling you very briefly about the ecosystem of the Aalto University. Aalto University was established 7 years ago by joining together the University of Technology, the University of Business, or the Helsinki Business School, and the University of Applied Arts. And from the outset, I was involved in this discussion. We were discussing whether this university should be called the Innovation University, but it received the name of the historically leading Finnish architect, Alvar Aalto. And in fact, the Aalto University has taken the innovation activities very seriously. We have a huge number of different actions and programs. On the one hand, university is educating and training potential future entrepreneurs, is networking venture capital and experts to start up new businesses. Another thing that is very delightful to us is that the students of the Aalto University have been very active. We have a large operation where the students on their own, spontaneously have started developing venture projects and different kinds of events, of which Slush, of course, is the best known. And thirdly, if we want to establish new innovations, new businesses, it's always a matter of cooperation. We have to, and we have built cooperation networks, partner networks at the European level and at an international level. And this slide shows you the results. Half of the startups, university startups in Finland, come from Aalto University. The MIT has defined Aalto University as one of the 5 leading innovation universities in the world. I think this is quite an achievement, quite a certificate of our success in these matters. And as I said in the beginning, this is an ongoing project, and you can see the figures for last year's event. This is one of the largest, if not the largest, meeting point of venture capitalists and startups, and it has aroused interest everywhere, and several countries are now having their corresponding events supported by the students of the university. The university is also carrying out research, and in this context, it is worth noting the valuable funding support that the European Union is offering. We have the European Research Framework Program, and you can see the structure of that program here, and you can see that in principle the structure is exactly what society needs. We need excellency, we need top expertise, we need leadership in terms of industry, and we are facing major societal challenges, and in these projects we are doing our best to promote these. And we are most proud that the Aalto University and myself have started this project and been able to involve the leading innovation and research units in Europe, Manchester 20 and Uranium Research. And the purpose of this project was and is to find out or to investigate how innovation processes have changed during the past 5 to 10 years. And in this context, we have interviewed more than 700 companies from 5 industrial sectors, and they are a representative, significant sample of European industries. We have 11 countries that are covered by this project, and the results are extremely interesting. Here is just a listing of the topics that come up in the results. Innovations are created in ecosystems. There are new web-based tools that are being used in a large scale. Open innovation is the standard tool at the moment, but there is a major confusion in terms of what kinds of opportunities there are to protect innovations and intellectual property if we're only operating through open innovation. And innovation management and practices have changed tremendously, and this means that innovation policies have also become outdated, which means that on the basis of these results we will have to reform the innovation policy tools. And our results have been very well received. We have defined what innovation activities are all about these days. This has given rise to major interest all over the world. For example, Australia and Brazil are going to implement corresponding studies in the European Commission DG. One of the DGs, we had a discussion where we discussed the results and its what it means for the future. And this is a major effort and major initiative in the direction of understanding that innovation is something that is changing all the time. That's why we need to have a monitoring mechanism that will help us find out how it is changing so that we can keep our innovation policies up to date, so that it's not working according to outdated principles. So, in addition to the policy recommendations within the framework of this project, we have also prepared a handbook that is intended for all European businesses that defines the practices and or the best practices that have been identified when promoting innovation in European companies. And all in all, this is related to the wider discussion of getting 30 billion more of export income, or that we need to have more investments in Europe. None of these can come true unless we can stimulate innovation in Europe, because innovations are the tool to create new businesses that are competitive in global terms. With these words, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Kiitos Erkki ja vielä muutkin puhujat.
Tähän väliin on varmasti ihan kiva nähdä, mitä konkreettisia. I think it would be good to see at this point what concrete projects have been supported with these funds. We have a short video clip, and after that we will start our dialogue.
I try to raise awareness, especially amongst the private sector, that there are lots of resources available if you are interested in to use it to R&D.
Vi har byggt ett system, Smart Video, som tar en video och sen gör det möjligt att handla i videon, och det är lättare för sökmotorerna att se vad som finns i videon.
Je suis Bastien Ritsen, CEO et cofondateur de Zebra Academy, société active donc dans le domaine de la télémédecine ambulancière.
We are a very small company. And we produce dry pumpkin noodles.
It's a company that manages and explores centers of automobile inspections.
Tillsammans betyder det här att man säljer mer med traditionell videoannonsering än innan Smart Video fanns.
Nous permettons de mettre en contact un médecin avec un patient déjà pendant le trajet ambulancier. L'idée étant de gagner du temps quand le patient arrive dans l'hôpital pour avoir un meilleur résultat clinique pour ce patient.
We believe that our project is innovative and we think it's successful and it's a good investment.
With the money that we receive, we will finance at least 200 farmers.
Cu ajutorul lor am reușit să atragem 100.000 de euro pentru achiziții de utilaje moderne din planul de investiții de la Comisia Europeană.
Small, medium size, large, we provide them working capital loans, we provide them long-term loans for investments in utilities, in equipment.
Den viktigaste saken som den här investeringen har betytt för oss, det är att Norrlandsfonden är ett kvalitetsmärke som gör att de andra investerarna känner sig säkrare och därför är mer villiga att gå in i den här affären.
Aceste utilaje moderne ne-au creat posibilitatea să menținem productivitatea cât mai ridicată, pentru că, datorită condițiilor vitrige din centrul Moldovei, e foarte greu să ținem pasul cu ceilalți fermieri care și din Uniunea Europeană și din România, din zonele mai favorabile.
They finally decide about the this project we fund from EIB from Juncker plan.
Och sen så de resurser som vi har fått har också gjort det möjligt att ta nyckelrekryteringar i ett tidigare skede i projektet. Så vi kommer kunna röra oss fortare.
The health of our people will be very better, and finally more people will work in future in our region.
And we hope to get the innovation in all our centers in order to help even more the country.
This is a great program for start a business and present your idea, and your dreams can be true.
Loistavaa. Nyt on meidän dialogi aika.
Excellent. Now it's time for our dialogue. Mr. Katainen, if you would step here, step up and join us. Yes, so after the final presentation, I again feel quite proud to be from Aalto University. It's our turn to ask questions from Mr. Katainen about the EU and its future. Joona, you can go first. Yes, thank you. We have talked a lot about trying to trigger investments and about the fact that we don't want the public money to prevent private investments. So how can we do this in reality? How can we channel money towards forward-looking projects and not to projects that only strengthen existing structures? The decision-making in FC, in our projects, goes like this. The investor or the entrepreneur gets into contact with European Investment Bank. They have offices in almost all European capitals, also here in Helsinki. And then the bank assesses the project. It goes through the normal pipeline, and the bank assesses the risks and the profits of this project. And if they decide that it's a good, rational, viable project, but its risk profile is such that they cannot take that into their own balance sheet, they will send it over to FC. And FC has its own management, and they will see whether the project meets certain targets, for example, for value added. So is this a project that could not be fulfilled at all in the same scale or otherwise? And if it can't, then FC will fund it. FC has a processing guarantee, so it needs to produce a result or a decision in a few weeks. So it's a pretty quick process. With this process, we have gained good results. Of course, you can always criticize decisions and projects, whether they produce enough added value and so on, but I feel that they are projects that could not be implemented in the same scale and as quickly with other funding. And another thing that makes us more certain about the viability of the project is that there's always private funding involved. So nothing will be launched without private funding, because private funds are always more cynical. Nothing starts without that. So the projects need to meet certain criteria. And if they do, then things get started. Good, thank you. At this point, I would like to inform the audience that you can ask critical questions as well. And we have some microphones for you so that you can ask your questions. My name is Eva Grannefeld from Grannefeld Finance. I would like to thank Jyrki and his people. I've been operating in financing for 40 years. Our company is a third-generation company, and we help growth companies to get funding and investments. We have been involved in all of the 4 that Jyrki mentioned. We have now 2 cases in the EIB now and 6 in the pipeline, and I was very worried to hear about the ending in the summer of 2018. So will it end? Good news, no. Okay, that was a good answer. Another question, when EU funds are channeled into Finland via different routes, well, the first thing is that you have to be smart enough to apply for that funding. The second thing concerns about intermediaries, intermediary body banks, that is through whom the funds get into Finland. This started in Spain, and when it was started, their GDP actually improved by 0.5%, and their employment improved as well. Finland has got around 400 million euros of that money, and then that has been distributed among the banks, and banks decide on who to grant that money to based on their own risk assessments. And the bank that has granted the most of this bank, out of 150 million euros, they have used or allocated 100 million euros. And now they're thinking about who to contact to get more funds to allocate to others, because now they're afraid that they will be running out of these funds. And I can guarantee you that they have allocated this money to projects that improve employment and growth. Thank you. Good to hear from an entrepreneur who has actually been involved in these projects. EFSI results have been so encouraging that we decided to continue with EFSI number 2, and hopefully that can continue seamlessly after EFSI 1. And hopefully we can do just that and continue guaranteeing the funding opportunities from EIB. And that opportunity has now increased to 100 million euros. So we will get more time and more financing capacity. And we believe that that can really trigger 500 billion euros instead of the 315 billion that I mentioned for FC1. So we have modified the results or the process in terms of openness, for example. But otherwise, it is the same. The intermediary banks, they are still the address or the office that you should address yourself to if you want to apply. I could ask you, you are a representative of a capital investment company or a body in Finland, thinking about what is going on with startups in Finland, for example. I think that is one of the reasons why more risk capital is coming into Finland, more so per capita than many other countries. Finland is pretty much at the top in European statistics in that. Is this a good idea? Is this a good idea to market this to capital investors? Of course it is. It is, absolutely. As the professor here said, we are lacking risk financing in this country. Banks cannot finance technology risks and not other risks either. So we don't have enough risk investments. Not the big ones, Rovio and others, but we have a huge gap for startups and smaller companies. They would only need like 200,000 euros, 500,000. Why can't they accept 5 million? Well, because then the foreign body will become the sole owner of that company, because everything depends on the valuation of the company during the first round, and at that point their value is pretty low. So there, in the lower end, we have a huge gap, a lack of funding. We need 7.5 million euros. And in the Finnish scale, that is a huge amount of money, and that requires that the company's valuation is around 50 million euros. So the problem is, especially in the lower end, we need to find common solutions for that from Finnvera, from private investors, and from EFSI. So I think it is extremely important that we can solve this. And this is due to the problem in the lower end is due to the fact that if the company has a turnover worth of 5 million euros, their valuation is no higher than that. If you get in 1 million, then somebody else will own 20% of your company. So that is the problem. You have to remember that ownership is key. It is important. That is one thing. And the second thing is that these days companies are born global. So every company, let's take Go Sleep as an example. They produce the sleeping eggs that you see in the Helsinki airport. They don't want to operate just in Finland. They want to go global immediately, in Dubai, in the US, wherever. But getting export funding for a small Finnish company, that is a huge effort. So here we would need some EU funding that has not existed in trade funding. EFSI has done something there, but we need to have a local funder or an investor as well. Good, thank you. More questions? Eero, the same issue basically, but from a different perspective. My perspective is that of the taxpayer. I don't know, Jyrki, whether it was your government or whose that decided to finally put things in balance. But that turned out to be pretty difficult, and if we come up with a very simple calculation, and if we think about corporate tax, we have around 200 billion euros of that in Finland, and most of that comes from just a few companies. One company, including my previous students, Ilkka Paananen and company. Well, what does that have to do with our topic today? When we assess projects, I think we should try to market the unique characteristics in Finland. And I think one of them is the giving back culture. I was very impressed that many, heads of state, royalty comes to Slush, the event organized by our former students. One of the issues here is the giving back culture. And I think that is a very significant topic. I don't think the taxpayers would oppose that smaller companies becoming larger. Supercell is an excellent example of this. It's not at all unclear that the startup scene can actually bring benefits to society. And I think we should really focus on that. The benefits come from different things. Some companies employ a lot of people, some do other things. My question is that, well, Slush has really made it easier, but how could we find investors for startups? So that is basically done with Slush, but there are other things that have not been solved. Looking at Joona and other students, Aalto University thinks that the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, for example, are really good, but are they the kinds of instruments that we can use to come up with next supercells and companies whose benefit is not necessarily money, but social impact, maybe not directly to Finland, but to other issues, immigration or refugees in their originating countries. EFSI is not a cure for all diseases, but it can do many things, and what it can do really depends on local companies, financing companies and other companies as well. Epiqus, I think, is an excellent example. The Commission has not come up with this model. It's your own creation. But EFSI really was still able to meet your needs, so we don't want to do the work of the entrepreneurs on their behalf. We don't want to say what you can do with FC. We can make it as easy to use as possible and hopefully see that it can be used in many ways. You ended your question on refugees and their original countries. After having learned things from FC, we came up with another thing called the External Investment Plan, and it has a different method compared to FC. Let's say that we have 10 billion euros per year for development aid. We give money so that people in other countries can build wells and train people, and we provide budget for that. But now 4 billion euros of this money will be put into a guarantee fund, and then this guarantee fund will be or can be used by financing institutions. So if the EIB or Finnish Bank or the World Bank or FinFund in Finland, if they want to finance a Finnish entrepreneur who is building digital infrastructure in a developing cooperation partner country, it can be a viable project, but the country risk is too high. Then that risk can be covered by the guarantee fund. The idea is to get private money to the development aid countries as well. And the idea is to provide more than money, not just give them money, but other things as well. And this legislation is quite new. It was only adopted a month back. Dear students, we have heard a lot about mega trends and that this is something we should face head on. So I would like to ask our students to come up with questions on mega trends. Do we, as the younger generation, do we understand what this all refers to? Do we understand where we're going? And Emmi can come up with the question.
Right, thank you, Jorma Turunen from the technology industries in Finland. Excellent presentations, all of these, thank you for those. And it seems that, Jyrki, you have succeeded as the salesman for European funding. It's great to hear these good news, but my question is about the second thing that you mentioned, the Mercosur agreement. Now that things are going as they are with the United States, this seems to be a very important agreement for Europe. Now, it seems as if the Mercosur ambassadors in Europe have been tasked with lobbying duties, and the question that they have is the same that you mentioned, that 4 billion might be available. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of talk about the European agricultural policy and about whether especially France is willing to be flexible on this side. Well, the negotiations with Mercosur started 17 years ago, and during the past 1.5 years, there have been more things happening than the previous 15.5 years. And we are almost there, but only difficult things remain. There are things to defend and things to gain for both sides, and one of the things that are difficult for us and important for them are certain agricultural products, ethanol and beef. And what is problematic for them is access to public services or the opening up of the service industry and certain processed foods as well. All in all, Europe would be very well positioned in the new open trade if it happened. We will certainly be a winner. Some sectors will have a tougher time, other sectors will be very successful. And we are actually counting days. There has to be something happening within days. I think our negotiators will meet next time. They will have a 1-week session. And around the beginning of December, There will be a ministerial meeting in Buenos Aires, and the aim is to get it completed by the end of the year. I cannot promise anything, but there are good possibilities to achieve this. There will be some countries for which the situation is more difficult than for others. Not that they will have a negative balance. It will be positive for everyone, but some product groups may be hotter than others. In other words, their economic value need not be very high, but they are hot products. That's why the situation for us is challenging internally as well. But 2 weeks ago, when we had the last council meeting, we all said that we want to have this meeting and we will continue negotiating. Thank you. I will ask the next question. You mentioned development cooperation, and within the student union movement there has been a lot of discussion about this. The Finnish government has made significant cuts to the development budget, and the Finnish Association of Student Unions has been the first to do a development cooperation. Do you have any advice to give us how we can benefit from EU funding? Well, EU is a significant funder for development cooperation. We need to be able to reform the methods and ways of working all the time. Instead of just giving grants, we could give guarantees to private investments so that private funding is also brought in. And especially when we talk about Africa, there are tremendous natural resources and very good preconditions for economic growth, investments and employment. We know they have a lot of problems depending on the country. The rule of law may be weak in some countries, infrastructure may be weak in others. Some countries have all these problems. And this is something that has to be done step by step. But I do believe that as a newer kind of thinking, I do believe in the opportunities in private funding. Another thing has to do with training and education, both here and over there. And now I'm going to speak more about education and training that takes place here. I don't think there is any better development cooperation than to bring young people from our partner countries to Finland, Finnish educational institutions to study. One of my friends graduated from the Tampere University of Technology and actually worked in the Tampere water management company for a while and has been the prime minister in his country now for a while. So training and education is one tool, and another is to be able to integrate those people who already decided to flee from persecution in their home countries. We need to integrate them into society over here as well as possible. Just a few words about refugees and immigration. The perspectives that I have to these phenomena are that whether we like it or not, people always have a humanitarian responsibility for another human being. That is a fact that remains. And even this simple fact has been questioned more than for a long time, both in Europe and in Finland. And I think this is a fundamental value that we need to defend. Let's assume that we all agree that no human is responsible for another human being. Where would that lead us? It's the same thing as we agreed that we don't have to apply the rule of law in all circumstances. This is one starting point. It doesn't mean that we have to open our doors for everyone, but if people are suffering, we need to help them. Another thing is that we need to look at the preconditions for growth in the countries where poverty is widespread. and there's a lot of suffering. How could we improve the conditions in that country so that people wouldn't have to leave because of these poor conditions? In Europe, we often tend to say that when we get Africa's economy up and running, then people will stay and don't come here. That's completely the opposite. Who has been in Erasmus, Erasmus exchange student? But who has been in Erasmus exchange? Okay. And that's partly because we are doing well. When society is wealthy enough, people have the possibility to leave, and that will increase mobility. Students will increase in number, talent and intellectual property will travel across borders, and this is what we have been aiming at in Europe, in the world in general, and that will happen in the global scale much more than now. And if we visit the poorer countries, there are many people who have mobile phones and internet connections, and this will lower their threshold to leave their country. When we're talking about people and their emergencies, their suffering, their mobility, their personal decisions, there are no black and white solutions. But nevertheless, everyone needs to consider the fundamental values and the respect for human dignity. This is something in which we that we cannot compromise. And the next question, please. I come from Espoo. And my question is linked to the same topic in a way. In order for these EU activities to really start happening across the borders in developing countries and elsewhere, could there be something like an investment protection type of scheme or operation? There was a free trade agreement with Canada. We tried to achieve a free trade agreement with the United States, and it was objected to because there was the protection of investments. And I would like to ask, why was it so scary? Because it seems to be a precondition for having the courage to achieve the impact with investments. If in Germany the political situation will now fundamentally change, I think that the situation will become worse in this respect, because Mrs. Merkel has been very open in this respect. She has wanted to help the people who are coming to Europe. Well, that is a good question. What is so frightening about investor protection? Apparently, the dispute solving mechanisms were not based on the rule of law and or the legal system. And many people felt that, for example, if a large mining company has detected minerals, say, in northern Finland, and the company insists on establishing a mine there, and people don't want to have the mine there, but the company is so strong that it will step over all democratic opinions. The EU has changed the situation and its targets, its aims, in such a way that we have given up insisting on the traditional investor protection agreements, or we do make investor protection agreements, but we also want to have an investor tribunal or court on investments with judges, and that will take care of these concerns. The basic aim is that we would have an international court of law for this to this end. That would be easiest. Thank you. I also paid attention to this, but I wanted to hear it from you. And it's often said in Finland, in arbitration, that a general court of law is the secondary option, But this could be the option for that. That is established precisely for this purpose. Thank you. There is time for a couple of questions. There's one. Yes, about funding. I have been following the reform of the European industrial and business structure. It seems that the biggest problem in Europe is not the creation of startups. We have as many startups being created in Europe as there are in the United States. But the biggest problem in Europe is that we are lacking growth companies, growth enterprises. And in some way, we need to tackle this problem with the help of funding instruments so that one day we could have Google or Apple or something like this in Europe. The 20 largest European companies are the very same companies that were there 30 years ago. In the United States, half of the largest 20 companies have been established after 1990. So this is the big strategic challenge that we are experiencing in Europe at the moment. Are you going to find a solution for this? Well, if I remember the figures correctly, in the United States, about 20% of corporate funding comes from banks and 75% from capital markets, whereas it's completely the opposite in Europe. 75% from banks and 25% from capital markets. And this is the problem because scalable companies cannot always get loans from banks, but they could survive better with capital funding. There are two questions. In fact, we have been talking about EFSI. It was intended to be a temporary structure to remedy the shortcomings of the present market structure. But also we need aim to develop the capital market in concrete terms. We are proposing concrete legislative changes. We're not talking about the smallest companies, but for example, we have changed the capital adequacy requirements for banks and insurance companies from what they used to be. It was beginning to be a problem that if the railway from the Charles de Gaulle airport to Paris downtown takes 30 billion per year as investments, that would be a problem. But also the securitization legislation that makes securities more transparent and understandable and will help release funding for SMEs as well. So there are methods that are available, and after businesses and enterprises start utilizing these possibilities, then I think it will get up and running. All right, I would like to ask the students present a question. How many of you knew what the investment plan for Europe was before this afternoon? Nor did I before yesterday when I studied the matter. And Jyrki, this is something that should be considered perhaps together with the university, that we have clearly seen that young people and students need to be able to understand that it is quite normal as startup entrepreneurs, for example, to benefit from European funding. What do you think are the core problems in this respect? Well, I think any Finnish university student and other students as well should make use of the Erasmus exchange program, because such a program is available. You really need to have weighty reasons not to go abroad. You don't need to use the Erasmus. You can go elsewhere than to Europe. You can study free of charge. It's an investment in yourself. It's no one's loss. I'm also trying to bring this message to vocational school students and to teachers. and instructors. Last year, or 2015, we had 3,500 teachers, school teachers, who participated in Erasmus Exchange for Teachers, because it's also beneficial for teachers, be it university instructors or school teachers or vocational teachers. I think this is the clearest and simplest answer. I participated in Erasmus Exchange in Britain, and I can say that it changed my life in very important ways. I did study too while there, and I think I actually managed to gather 22 credit points at that time. Slightly less than I would have in Finland, but it was so useful. I do understand that a lot of things are happening in life, and the European Union is not something that you monitor every day, but perhaps you should keep yourself up to date so that you know what is happening, because that is a prerequisite for you to be able to require and develop something. With EFSI, for example, the single most important challenge, even today, is that people know nothing about it. I don't know how much you know, but if I say that 95% of those who could benefit from it don't know about it, that I think is pretty close to the truth. We try to market it. There is social media marketing and other kinds of marketing, but still there are so many people who don't know about it. And scale-up enterprises could benefit from it if they knew about it. That's why you should keep yourselves up to date so that you know what there is, what you can benefit from, and that you know what you want and you can exert influence on the decision makers in Finland as well. Exactly, and we welcome this information effort in our home campus as well. And if I remember correctly, the Prime Minister, Mr. Sipilä, has promised to travel around all universities, so it's very welcome. It's up to the final comment. Is there one from the audience? Now, the interpreter is not able to hear what is being said because there is no microphone. The reason why transport is only 9% is due to a lack of demand. But I don't believe that the real demand is so low in transport as far as EU funding is channeled towards it. There are a number of other funding facilities, such as through the Connect Europe facility. But the FC transport projects have, in many cases, been new kinds of projects, such as interfaces between ports and railways, or green shipping projects for seas. Any project where you can imagine that a private investor could be involved could easily fall within the scope of EFSI. It's worth a try. And once again, whenever you have any ideas, please go and talk to the EIB Helsinki office. You will get more advice from there. And we also have something that is called the Technical Advisory Service. It's free of charge for public operators. There is a small fee for private operators. It's an advisory center that helps construct the projects so that they become efficient and sensible. It also gives advice on what kinds of EU funding channels could be utilized. Most users of this service so far have been private businesses and 40% public operators, and it has been a very functional model. And lastly, if you're interested in FC projects, when you go to EIB website, you can find all the projects there, and you get some idea what it can be used for. Thank you very much from my side. Thank you very much. And traditionally, we need to take a selfie together with the audience. It's the modern way. Excellent. Thank you. We also want to thank you for this event and this excellent discussion. I think we have used up our time. Thank you very much.